would you like to improve your health and keep your family safe? You're listening to the Healthy Home Hacks podcast, where we firmly believe enjoying optimal health shouldn't be a luxury. Healthy Home Authorities and husband and wife team Ron and Lisa will help you create a home environment that will level up your health. It's time to hear from the experts. Listen in on honest conversations and gain the best tips and advice. If you're ready to dive in and improve your well-being and increase your energy, you're in the right place. All right, here are your hosts, bowel biologists, authors, media darlings, vicarious vegans, and avocado aficionados, Ron and Lisa Barris.
This episode of Healthy Home Hacks is brought to you by Boren, world leader in homeopathic medicines. Is stress overload causing you some sleepless nights? Do you want to rest easier by supporting your body with a better way to feel better? For 90 years, Boren has been dedicated to providing your family with the purest medicines made from the Earth's best resources. Boren's Sleep Calm for adults and kids are melatonin-free sleep aids with no next-day grogginess. The melt-away tablets for adults and individual liquid doses for kids are non-habit-forming and have no drug interactions. From stress to sleep, pain relief, allergies, and more, Boren has got you and your family covered with affordable homeopathic remedies that are easy to find online and in natural product stores nationwide. Help your body the natural way with gentle, worry-free formulas for even the littlest ones in your family. Visit BorenUSA.com, that's BOIRONUSA.com, to find the nearest retailer or buy direct using code RL20OFF. That's RL20OFF to save 20% off your entire purchase.
Welcome to the second episode of Healthy Home Hacks Season 4 with our new streamlined format. You spoke and we listened. So while we both love talking, it turns out you all prefer the 30-minute format. So today, we'll try to keep the long-windedness to a minimum.
One of the questions we get asked the most is, how do I test my home for mold affordably? People come to us after being quoted thousands of dollars for a professional inspection, but most people don't want to start throwing money in the air, especially if they're not 100% sure if they even have mold. But this leads us to the next concern, which is, how do you know if a DIY mold kit is reliable, accurate, and going to give you results from a certified lab?
Our guest today is going to cut through the mold myths and help you protect yourself and your loved ones from potential toxic exposure to mold in your home without breaking the bank. In fact, with this home test kits, you receive a report that includes the type of molds detected and in what quantity, as well as a practical and easily understood interpretation of the lab results, all in a matter of a few days. Your report will include the types of mold detected, what quantity, as well as the practical and easily understood interpretations of the lab results, all with no beakers or goggles needed. The cost of these kits includes certified lab analysis and all shipping costs.
The realization that his moldy childhood home was the underlying cause of his extreme allergies and asthma led him to the healthy home business in 2002, leaving behind a successful career on Wall Street. Jason Earle is a man on a moldy mission, an adoring father of 2 boys in diapers, an incurable entrepreneur, an indoor air quality crusader. Jason is the founder and CEO of the mold inspection company 1-800-GOT-MOLD and the creator of the Got Mold test kits.
Over the last 2 decades, Jason has personally performed countless sick building investigations, solving many medical mysteries along the way, while helping thousands of families recover their health and enjoy peace of mind. Jason has been featured or appeared on Good Morning America, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, The Dr. Oz Show, Entrepreneur, Wired, and more. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Woohoo!
Thank you for
Welcome,
having me.
Jason.
Thank you. Quite an introduction. Sometimes I forget that's me.
Right? It's fun.
Very good. Well, we're excited to have you, Jason.
It's so good to be here.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Let's dive right in.
Jason, working with mold isn't exactly a well-worn career path. So why and how did you end up doing what you do?
Well, as you said, Ron, it is not exactly an academic track in university. And I think in most cases, the people who are doing great work in this space have a personal experience, something that they feel that they've learned from their experience and that they want to pay it forward. At least that's my experience with the people that I hold in the highest esteem in this industry. And so there's no exception here with me. When I was about 4 years old, I suddenly lost a lot of weight in a 3-week period and I was having difficulty breathing. So my parents took me to the pediatrician and they said, you should take him to the hospital. So they took me to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and which is a renowned respiratory clinic. And their initial diagnosis, based upon my family history and the symptoms that I was presenting with, was cystic fibrosis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is a death sentence back then.
That's crazy. At how old? 3?
I was 4.
4. Wow.
Yeah. And it was particularly troubling to my father, who had lost 4 of his cousins before the age of 14 to CF, which is
wow.
So, and I was their only child.
Oh my goodness.
So they spent the next 6 weeks crying and trying to console each other while they waited for the second opinion. And fortunately, and evidenced by the fact that I stand here at 46 years old, I was not actually suffering from cystic fibrosis, but rather I had asthma compounded by pneumonia.
Oh.
And when they tested me for allergies, which was one of my formative memories, actually, they put you in a papoose, like a straitjacket for toddlers.
Oh, God, that doesn't sound good.
Have a grid on your back, and then they do these antigen skin tests.
Okay, yeah. I've had that done, but not with the straitjacket. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's harder to restrain a 4-year-old.
Child,
right? Yeah. So my dad said I look like a ladybug. My back just swollen red with dots all over it. So they tested me for, I forget what the number was, but I tested positive for every single allergen that they exposed me to. So
we're talking environmental allergens, not just molds. We're talking about like pollen,
grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, cotton. Wow. So my clothing was constantly itchy.
Oh, all
of my childhood. And I grew up on a small non-working farm where I was surrounded by all those things, grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats,
for sure.
Soybeans. We're soybean fields as far as you could see, cornfields all around. And we had a lot of animals. We had a sort of a rescue menagerie.
Nice.
My dad used to answer the phone, Earl's Emporium and Petting Zoo.
Aw, that sounds like a place we'd go, Ron. We love animals. Yeah.
It was a great way to grow up, honestly. And I spent most of my time outdoors because of that, and not knowing it, just intuitively. I spent that was also the way we were back then. And, our generation played outside a lot.
Go out and play. Stop complaining that you don't have something to do. Go get creative and make a game up. Yeah.
That's right.
Climb in the trees.
And we ate a lot of dirt, and all those things should have been good for me. But what was going on there? Well, fast forward, my folks split up when I was about 12, which was a blessing for everybody. And when I moved out of that house, all my symptoms went away. It wasn't immediate. In fact, it was relatively gradual. So it wasn't as if somebody, said, oh my gosh, they didn't connect the dots right away. But my grandfather had grown out of his asthma. And so there was some commentary around that it was just one of those adolescent things. But in retrospect, it's very clear to me. We had a very damp basement. The river ran through it when it rained. It was always that distinct characteristic musty odor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it would create a lot of heaviness. I'd go down there to play. And I remember feeling lethargic. My energy was compromised from that. And I remember wheezing a lot more being down there, but not connecting the dots. The awareness around mold was non-existent back then. I mean,
this conversation, right? It wasn't really talked about.
Not at all. Not at all. Mold, schmold, wipe it off.
Exactly. It's on food. Oh, well, no big deal.
Exactly. Fast forward, I ended up through a series of happy and unhappy accidents, ended up on Wall Street at a very young age. And I did that for 9 years and had a nice career. And then I one day got disenchanted and wanted to do something meaningful with my life. So I went on walkabout. And while I was away, I was in Hawaii and I was reading a lot of the local newspapers. I had a lot of time on my hands. There were a number of stories about a huge mold problem that had been discovered in the Hilton Kalia Tower, which is the flagship property in Oahu. And the building had been shut down for a while when I got there. And there's one particular article that jumped out. It was about one of the employees, and he had developed adult onset asthma, which is something I'd never heard of before. And he was suddenly sensitive to all these foods and environmental allergens that he had never had a problem with. And it was like a light bulb went on, right? For me, it was just like, wow, that sounds just like me, kind of in reverse,
Yeah.
And so I took that to the internet, which still didn't have a whole lot about mold and health. This is 2001, 2002. And I started looking around and I just realized that it was literally in that moment. Sometimes people get sort of a white light experience or they just immediately know what they're supposed to do, an aha moment. And for me, that was it. I just became fascinated, not with mold per se, but it is fascinating. I mean, for all the fear around mold, it's actually quite beautiful. And
that is a first, Jason. We've done some shows on mold, and I've never heard anyone say that.
Well, you have to recognize that without that, we would be awash in dead stuff.
Yeah.
And so it serves a very important function. And in fact, some molds are used for medicine, of course, with penicillin, and lots of molds and yeasts and things are used for food. And so, to throw it all into one bucket is a disservice. We actually need this stuff, and we need a certain amount of it in our home too. Diversity in your home. You don't want a sterile home.
No, I tell that to people all the time. They're like, oh, you're in the healthy home business. You want people to have your home spick and span. And I'm like, no, I want your home to have no chemicals.
That's right.
I want your home to breathe and to be healthy. And yeah.
Well, I love your perspective on mold and how the positive aspects of that. That's the first time I've ever heard someone say that. That's inspiring. Well, Jason, mold is everywhere, right? Basically, even on Wall Street. So if all houses have mold in them, what's the difference between having mold and having a mold problem?
Well, as you said, mold is a natural part of the environment. Mold, if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, it's breaking down leaves and twigs and dead plant material in your yard. But when it's doing that in your house, not so good. And the reality is that we build buildings out of paper mache. Even the dumbest of the three little pigs didn't build this house out of paper.
Yeah.
But the bigger problem is that we also if you rewind, first of all, we used to have artisans building homes, and homes naturally breathe, right? We didn't have insulation in the walls, which was problematic. But that lack of insulation allowed for something called drying potential, which means that water gets in the wall and it also can dry. And so now we fill our walls full of fluffy stuff that gets wet, stays wet. We also wrap our buildings in vapor barriers, which oftentimes are improperly installed, which reduces drying potential even further. And of course, because of the lack of artisanal or lack of training and lack of skill, we just don't have the skilled labor that we used to. A lot of windows are improperly installed. Flashing is often forgotten. So building defects are much more rampant. It doesn't matter how much a house costs. The reality is that most houses are built improperly. In fact, I see it more with high-end homes that have all the unique valleys and, the fancy. If it's beautiful on the outside, oftentimes they're hiding inadvertently, often, real problems. So around the 60s and 70s, as we were starting to worry about energy, we started closing these buildings up even tighter to keep them comfortable. And so what happens is we build out of mold food, water gets in, can't get out. That's all a mold problem is a moisture problem. So let's just get that clear. Mold is a moisture problem. That's it. That's the problem. It's not the mold. Mold is the symptom. And so we build buildings out of mold-friendly materials. And then when it starts to grow, because of these moisture conditions, the contaminants that molds produce, and it's a factory of contaminants. Mold produces a variety of different things. Mycotoxins are just part of the story. That musty odor is a potpourri of very potent chemicals, alcohols, ketones, aldehydes, some benzene, which is a class 1 carcinogen, can be found emanating from actively growing mold colonies. So it almost looks like an industrial factory if you look at those chemicals with the GC mass spectrometer. So these things build up in our indoor environment. So normally the wind would blow and those things would just simply dissipate, right? They'd be diluted and they'd blow through. Here we live in buildings, and then we also add...
They're so tightly sealed.
Yeah. And then we also add that, by the way, to, all the man-made VOCs that are coming off of all of our furniture from the big box stores and, the stuff we're getting from China and
bedding,
what have you. So
upholstery,
paints,
freneners, flooring, cabinetry,
right. Finishes, furniture,
cleaning. Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom.
And then you have you literally have a toxic brewery at some point if you're not cognizant of this and you're kind of just swarming in this environment, unaware that these things, the detrimental health effects that they can have.
Yep. And then we also don't leave the house, right? We used to leave the house and we go from our house to our car, to our train, to a plane. Rob Dunn, who wrote a wonderful book called Never Home Alone, which I highly recommend to everybody. And we'll talk more about the diversity, by the way, about the fact that we need microbes in our house. The higher level of microbes in your house is directly correlated to a lower asthma and allergies, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the higher diversity equals a lower incidence of asthma and allergies. So we need that stuff.
We need to be exposed, right? We need to build up our immunity.
That's right.
Okay, so Jason, how does someone listening, they suspect they have a mold problem? What does he or she look for? What's a good place to start? Maybe they're smelling a musty, they're suspecting, but they don't really know.
I always say, if you see it, smell it, or feel it, if you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something. So if you see it, that would be obviously anything that would be indicative of a moisture problem. So peeling paint, blistering paint, trim that pulls away. By the way, they call it trim, baseboard trim. I call it molding for a reason, right? It's molding.
Right.
So that it traps moisture behind the bottom of the wall assembly. So if you're seeing any sort of movement like that, where materials are moving inconsistently, that's a red flag. If obviously any standing water or condensation, you see a window that's a big red flag.
I think that's important, listeners, because a lot of people go, but I don't see mold. Doesn't matter. If you see the moisture, the mold could be non-visible to your eye. It could be under the substrate of the wall or what have you. So
that's right.
Your nose does know. And like you talked about the musty smell, like really paying attention to that and not kind of just shunning that.
Now, Jason, do you have a good nose for this? Because I swear Lisa has, like most women, have a better sense of smell when it comes to like something bad. Like I'll find out like 10 minutes later and she'll be like, oh my God,
like
you
10
smell
days
that?
later.
Yeah. By the way, it's not just female humans who have a better sense of smell. We use mold dogs for 12 years, mold sniffing dogs, and we only used females because this is a survival trait. Women in general, female dogs as well, have to be able to smell what's going on with the babies. They have to smell a dirty diaper from across the room, of sickness. These kinds of things are part of why women have superpowers, right? But it's also why they can be a little bit difficult when it comes to these things because they're picking up things that we're busy ignoring. So this is why, there's a balance with all this stuff.
Mold sniffing dogs. Okay, we've done shows on mold. That was the first. I've never heard that. Do you use that in your inspection company?
My last dog, who was my first one actually, died about 6 years ago, and it was like losing a child, and I just couldn't go back to do it again. So actually that was when I decided to really dedicate my efforts towards developing the Got Mold test kit.
Nice. Wow. I love it.
What do they call that? Not K9, but M9 dog.
These dogs are between the truffle pigs and the
you're right.
They're pretty amazing.
It was truly the best, but because they can find the source of the musty smell. See, this is the key, right? So what happens is you've got two different kinds of mold problems, by the way. You've got mold that's visible or on surfaces that are visible, right? Which is caused by moisture, high humidity, or maybe a wet surface. The more insidious stuff is what they call a hidden mold, which is kind of a misnomer. It's more like sequestered. That's the stuff that's in a wall. That the spores won't come through because spores can't jump through walls. They're physical matter, right? They're like little seeds. But the musty smell can come through. And mycotoxins can also not come through, contrary to popular opinion. So you can have the quote unquote toxic mold in a wall and you're not being exposed to the mycotoxins. I hate to tell people this, but you're not.
That's good though.
It's good. It's good. But you can still get sick from that. And people do because of the musty odor.
Because they try to handle it themselves, right? They try to
that too. But the musty odor is directly correlated with a number of illnesses. In fact, emerging research is leaning towards the idea that the musty smell is the leading cause of mold-related illness amongst all of the different things. People think about mycotoxins. Some molds produce mycotoxins, and even those only produce them sometime. Whereas all molds, when growing, produce the musty smell.
Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
So people tend to want to find the toxic mold or the non-toxic mold and say as if that would determine whether or not they're going to do something.
Right, exactly.
And the reality is that there's no such thing as an acceptable amount of mold growth of any significance in your building.
Right. I think people are obsessed with black Stachybotrys, but they call it black, right? They are kind of, that's all they care about. Is it black? Is it black? And as we know, there's a lot of black molds, not just the toxic Stachybotrys.
So Jason, what's the safe amount of mold to have present in one's home?
That's like saying, what's a safe amount of peanuts in your house? Because really it's an individual sensitivity kind of thing. I can eat a jar of peanut butter on a weekend, but there are some people, if I breathe on them after that, they'll end up in anaphylaxis. And so it's not dissimilar. This is a very personal issue. It's an individual sensitivity kind of a thing, generally speaking. However, I will say this, if you're chronically exposed, you can develop the sensitivities. And you see this a lot. That's where the adult onset asthma comes in, right? Like that gentleman who I read about back in Hawaii. So that is a very, very serious thing. And by the way, that's hard to undo. Most people, once you have that, you don't get back. So you really want to be careful. If you smell, that's why it goes back to if you see it, smell it, or feel it, you do something because you can alter your immune system and you can become hypersensitive to it. It takes a lot of, there are some interesting neurofeedback and other things that people do to deal with that. But generally speaking, once you bend to that, you're there.
Level. Yeah. We have a homeopathic doctor we had on the show, and she treats mold in the body. Mold that's present in the body with homeopathic remedies, and she's had good success. Yeah, that's scary.
I'd like to learn more about that.
Oh, okay. I'll send you in fact, I'll put it in the show notes to the episode for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jason, are there current laws or regulations when it comes to mold?
Yes, and there are, but they're largely insufficient. There are some states where, first of all, there's no law that says you can't have mold.
We're going to find you.
That's right. There are some places where there are regulations around how it should be handled. Like the state of Texas was the first to enact that. And in those places where there's legislation that's functional, there's a clear divide between mold inspection and mold remediation companies, which is a very good thing. And I highly recommend that anybody's going to hire a professional. Don't hire first of all, don't do a free inspection. That's a sales call. Second of all, don't hire someone who also does
the remediation. Yeah, you're going to find mold. You're going to find a mold problem.
That's right. You're going to find, don't ever ask a barber if you need a haircut, right?
Right.
And so the thing about a lot of people skip over an inspection, which is a big mistake, because a good inspector will actually reduce the size of the remediation to the smallest possible amount. But a remediation contractor will want to expand it to the largest possible amount. So if you think you're going to save money and not get an inspection, trust me, you'll pay. Oftentimes a multiple of what you thought you were.
And let's be honest, Jason, like people, if they see a spot and they try to, fix it themselves without having an inspection, they don't know what they don't see. What they don't see can hurt them. So how would they know that unless they had a professional that can come in there and do that?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the mold regulations are insufficient. More importantly, there's an industry standard. It's called the IICRC S520. Now, the problem with the S520 is that you can't find out as a consumer what's in it. Google it, look for it all you want. You can buy it online even if you want to buy the book. And that's the only way you can get to it. But you have to download it with a special reader that won't allow you to copy or print, because the industry association, who is the keeper of the keys, is very concerned about their copyrights. And so oftentimes you will be told to hire an IICRC certified firm. Very good advice. But more importantly, you should make sure that the foreman is IICRC certified, because you can have the firm certified and they'll send people that aren't qualified. Happens all the time. And so also, and we're working on a consumer version of that document, by the way, for mass distribution with a wonderful man who's a grandfather of the industry named Carl Grimes. He and I are spearheading this. And the idea behind that is to help, sort of like separate the wheat from the chaff. A lot of contractors want to use chemicals. That's not advocated in the IICRC S520. So they want a fog. That is not advocated.
But no one can see that document?
You cannot see it.
So a lot of people don't know that you can't do those.
That's
that you're not supposed to do those treatments. Wow.
And a lot of contractors hide in that opacity, and they misreference the standard and say that this is part of the protocol, and it's not. Mold remediation is a controlled demolition under special environmental controls to prevent contamination and to protect the occupants, and then a fine cleaning. And you don't need chemicals. You don't need to kill mold, which is, kind of a counterintuitive thing. And if you start looking at all the shelves in Home Depot and Lowe's, you'll see lots and lots of products that are designed for that. But the truth of the matter is, it is not part of the deal.
Jason, that was my trick question. You actually took that away from me. I was going to ask you, what's the best way to kill mold? But you already answered it.
You don't kill it. You remove it, right?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah.
I used to joke around that anti-dihydrogen monoxide is the only chemical that's used for killing mold. And anti-dihydrogen monoxide is anti-H2O. So dryness, right, is the only thing. But it's not enough to just dry it out. You also have to remove it, physically remove it using HEPA filter vacuum cleaners, damp wipes. And this is why
bleach. No bleach.
And
no
why?
Bleach.
Why? Because
it's caustic, it's a respiratory irritant. We don't want it in our house, period, let alone dousing your mold with it.
That's right. And it's also 97% water. And so 3% sodium hypochlorite. And so the sodium hypochlorite evaporates, which adds VOCs to the house. It has bleached the surface. So you get this false sense that you've done something, but you've left dead mold behind. And yes, you can render spores inert in such a way that they won't reproduce, but you can't get rid of the other spores that will land on the surface or the ones that you didn't get to. And mold loves to eat dead mold. So you bleach the surface. So you have this false sense that you've done something. You've left behind what? If the sodium hypochlorite evaporates, what have you left behind?
Fumes.
Water. You just added water to a water problem. Congratulations. Yeah. And then you've also left behind mold food, which is dead mold, not to mention on the substrate that was already supporting mold growth. And there's hyphal fragments, which are the roots of mold growth. They're there waiting to just come back. So bleach, that's the best way to not kill. That's the best way to kill mold, but it's not the best way to do anything really in a building, because what you actually do is set for something also called competitive release. And so there's you'll actually amplify the mold problem by doing that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we have a listener who says she is pretty sure she has a mold problem. What should she do first? And then what's the next steps?
Well, the first thing is you want to identify the extent of the problem, and you want to figure out what the source of the moisture is, right? So figuring out where the moisture is coming from is first and foremost, because you want to first stop that, no matter what that is. So whether it's an interior problem or an exterior problem or a combination thereof. And then you want to figure out what the extent of the problem is, because without that, you won't be able to know what the remediation steps would be. So generally speaking, we recommend that people get a professional involved, but that can be budget busting. It's also very hard to find a qualified person that you can trust. Lots of them, like I said before, are conflicted. They've got their hands in two cookie jars. And so that can be a real problem. But, one of the things, that's why we created the Got Mold test kit. And so what we put together was a product that essentially allows you to take the same kinds of samples that professionals use, but without having to deal with any of those conflicts of interest. You can sample up to 3 rooms using aerosol cassettes, which are called spore traps. And so you can find what's in the ambient air. The other thing is that you want to make sure that you've gotten, if you're having serious symptoms, you may consider relocating temporarily while you're dealing with this, because lots of people will just sort of hunker down and say, act as if it's going to go away on its own, and it won't. But the big thing about
if you're having symptoms, you want to get out of that space. Yeah.
But the most important thing about all this is that a mold problem is a moisture problem. And if you have a moisture problem, that can be dealt with quickly and usually cheaply or for free, as long as you get to it within 24 to 48 hours. The industry standard for the S500, which is the water damage part of it, says you've got 24 to 48 hours to get things dry, or it's highly likely to become a mold problem. At 72 hours, you're supposed to treat everything that's porous that was affected by the water as if it's moldy, whether it's got visible mold or not. And so once you get past those 3 days, then you end up with a mold issue, and that's a different standard. And what's interesting is that the S500 deal, that's usually an insurance claim kind of a thing. And you can get that paid almost to an unlimited degree. Soon as you cross that threshold, insurance will cap you at $5,000 or $10,000 if they cover it at all, and your costs go through the roof. So it's extremely important. People think about mold issues in weeks and months. So I've had a problem for a long time. You need to think about this stuff in terms of hours and days.
Okay.
Wow, that's a great tip.
Yeah, we're talking about critical, toxins and allergens and all of this. So,
speaking of toxins too, we hear a lot about.
I wanted one quick question. So you have both. You offer both services, the hire the professional or do it yourself. Would you say, I know the EPA says hire professional if it's more than 10 square feet, the space of the mold, if you can see that. But would you say it's always a good rule to hire a professional unless you're on a budget?
Well, so 10 square feet is kind of a joke, because if you see 10 square feet on a wall, that's like the proverbial tip of an iceberg, right? Mold will, generally speaking, really proliferate behind that wall. So you cut that open. Now you've released, you've potentially opened up the can of worms. So in fact, if I see 1 square foot of mold, and I train people on how to do this, I'm not doing that myself.
Yeah, no.
Even I won't do that myself.
Either. Yeah.
I'm too humbled by this.
Yeah.
And too respectful of it. A few square inches is a red flag, 10 square feet. That's a 3 by 3 foot by 3 foot
that's
area. That's a lot of mold.
If you let it get that far out of control,
that was a refreshing response. That's funny, because I've always thought that too. Are you kidding me? 10
square feet is huge. Exactly.
It's a lot of mold. And by the way, they also talk about in the same guidelines that you should only use containment at certain levels. And I don't believe that's true. In fact, the standards clearly says that you should use containment. Anytime you're going to cut a wall and you're going to remove mold from an area where there's a known problem, you use containment. And you use containment and negative air pressure, because this stuff is designed to break free and become airborne. Imagine billions of dandelions, those little white balls. At a microscopic level, it's designed to break free and proliferate, right? So no, you need to be very, very cautious. I always suggest that if it's beyond your comfort zone and you are not truly up to speed on all this stuff, a professional is your best friend. A qualified professional is your best friend. And again, they'll save you money on remediation if they're doing the good job. They will reduce it to the smallest because they're paid for their advice. They're not paid for per square foot.
Great point. Hey, so Jason, rapid fire. We got 2 more questions. We hear a lot about black mold and mycotoxins. They seem scary to most people. Can you elaborate on these? Remember, rapid fire, Jason.
Yeah. Listen, there's no doubt about it that mycotoxins are a threat to health in general. Animals, plants, even, believe it or not. And of course, humans. So you want to make sure that you're not creating an environment that's conducive to the growth of toxigenic species. And that means chronic water damage. What you tend to see is that Stachybotrys, it takes a while to grow. It's a slow growing mold, but it's a wet, dry cycle. And so these molds that are toxigenic typically are what they call tertiary molds. They're the third group of molds to show up to the party. If you've allowed it to get to that point, essentially they're trying to take over your house and they're trying to get you out.
Yeah.
So that's the way you have to think about it. And by the way, they're also using those toxins to kill other molds. This is microscopic. This is chemical warfare on a microscopic level.
Ooh,
okay.
Well said. Yeah.
In fact, those chemicals have been used in biological warfare. The T2 mycotoxin was used in the Iran-Iraq war. And when you saw those pictures of people bleeding out of their orifices, that was it.
Oh my God. Yeah.
No joke. But the reality of it is that it's actually responsible for a very small amount of mold-related illness. So people tend to focus on mycotoxins. They want to do the mycotoxin tests in their blood and urine. That's important. But if you don't have it, but you believe you got mold-related illness, you can't disprove the mold-related illness with the absence of mycotoxins in your urine. The other thing about mycotoxins is that the vast majority of mycotoxin exposure comes from food. So
moldy food?
Yes, we import moldy food. America has the lowest bar for that out of all the developed countries.
And breads, right? Cereals and breads.
Cereals, that's right. So that's one of the reasons why we always advocated no sugar, no grains diet for people that are in recovery from mold. Because the first thing you want to do if you want to detox is stop toxing.
Yeah.
And mold loves to eat stuff that was at one time living, like, the grains and all that stuff. And it just proliferates in that stuff.
Wow.
So you really want to make sure that you're taking into consideration the fact that mycotoxins are ubiquitous in our world. In fact, the UN said that up to 25% of grains are contaminated with mycotoxins.
Ew. There was a doctor, Dr. Hulda Clark. She wrote a book called The Cure for All. You know her?
Mm-hmm.
The Cure for All Cancers, The Cure for All Late Stage Cancers. Amazing woman. And she was like, yeah, all illness stems from mold and parasites.
And VOCs.
And I want to say chemicals too. And like, we just, kind of go through and trust that something's on the shelf and it's safe and don't question that. So yeah.
That's right. And just to take that further on the VOC part, she found VOCs and parasites and fungi and tumors. That was her job. She dissected tumors for the Canadian Health Ministry. And so when she found the VOCs, what's interesting is she didn't connect the dots at the time, but it was most likely microbial VOCs, right? So the molds are producing that. And then also the hormones from the parasites were actually proliferating the cellular division of the cancer, actually fueling the cancer division. So
yeah. Well, careful of that sushi, listeners. Careful of that sushi.
That's right.
So Jason, what are some of the common symptoms associated with mold toxicity? This is another question we get asked all the time.
It's a huge list. It's a huge list. I mean, you've got the typical upper respiratory stuff, which is typically allergic. And then you've got toxicity related, which is generally inflammation and a lot of cognitive impairment, brain fog, emotional dysregulation. Mold rage is a real thing.
Mold rage. Yeah. We did the Dr. Oz show too, actually. And we did a show on mold with them. And that was one of the things I was telling the producers. Yeah. It's linked to rage. And she's like, oh, this is so interesting. We got to talk about that.
Yeah. It's a real thing. But, the inflammation part's fascinating. We're working with a high volume psychiatric clinic that does mostly online work. They have 400 new patients a month, and they've identified inflammation as a commonality amongst almost all of their patients, with the exception of people that are coming in for relationship issues. And even those people have some inflammation. And so he believes that, and we're working with them, they're going to prescribe our test kit to every single new patient. And so the reality is that mold tends to be, it can mimic a lot of things, a lot like Lyme disease, where, it shows up in different ways in different people. But the fact of the matter is that, if you have to be able to engage your senses and know that you're in an environment where this is, if you see it, smell it, or feel it. And then if you find yourself struggling with any sort of emotional dysregulation, inflammation, headaches, nausea, dizziness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, these kinds of things, any dermal issues. The one thing that's really tricky though, and I will leave you with this, is that there is an emotional component to mold. And it's not so much psychosomatic, but fear kicks in and it generates there's an overwhelm that people get. And then they become sensitive to that. And then that kicks off a whole nother response. And so it's extremely important that you prevent yourself from getting to that point. And that really comes down to trusting your senses and taking action quickly before these things get out of control.
Yeah, trust your intuition. I mean, I couldn't say that enough with so many things, right?
Indeed. People usually know.
Yeah. And maybe ignore it, the whisper. Oh, wow, this is amazing. And like us, Jason and his team have some philosophies. One being that your house should be a safe and healthy place, not a source or cause of illness. We could not agree more. If you suspect mold in your home or office, head now to gotmold.com/Ron and Lisa and use the code Ron and Lisa 10 to save 10% of your total order.
And that's right. And to order a test kit, choose from 1 room, 2 room, or 3 room test kits and give yourself the peace of mind you deserve, knowing you'll obtain results from an accredited laboratory at a fraction of the cost of hiring a professional inspection company. Then you can take the next steps of hiring a pro or remediation company if needed. Thank you, Jason. You were so articulate, engaging, well-spoken. I loved all the language you use in describing mold. Like, what did you say? What was the word that you described on benzene being in the air?
A potpourri.
Potpourri. That's what it was. Oh my goodness. Thank you.
A potpourri.
I love this stuff. And I think it's a real privilege to be able to help people navigate this very confusing subject matter, because it is confusing even to people. Even professionals are confused by this stuff, right? There's so much, almost everything about it is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's a big topic and it's a hot topic, and people, like you said, I think there was an article I saw on your website about depression linked to mold. You have mold in the home, depression. So like your emotions are tied into this too. It's an emotional journey to go through that and not know and trying to get to the bottom. But anyways, Jason, from stocks to stocky buttress, we loved having you on. We will have all the links in the show notes at ronandlisa.com/podcast. Stay tuned next week, friends, and get ready to up-level your health. See you then. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
This episode of the Healthy Home Hacks podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more healthy living strategies and tactics to help you create the healthy home you've always dreamed of. And don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to bring you the best content. See you on the next episode.